Hi everyone, Lisa McNally here. I am the Vice Chair of the IBC Asia Pacific Board, and I would like to welcome you today and to welcome Emma Bannister, who's going to be running this webinar. So Emma grew up in a small town north of London, as you'll be able to tell when she starts talking. She started her career designing presentations for banks that traded in high standards and fast deadlines, as I'm sure some of you can probably relate to. Their expectations were what really ignited her ambition and led her to Australia in 2002. Knowing intelligent visuals packed a powerful punch, Emma took her passion for presentations one step further and launched Presentation Studio in 2006. So 10 years later, she now has over 20 staff, and today she's going to share with us practical skills and provide some guidance on what is industry standard today and possibly what your competitors are doing to win their pitches. Emma's going to provide us with a better understanding of how to prepare and plan for our next presentations. I'd like to hand over to Emma now, and she'll run through her presentation with you, teach you lots of skills, and she'll be very happy to also answer your questions.
Wonderful. Hi everyone, and thank you Lisa for the fabulous introduction. It's a real honour to be able to share the insights that I've learnt from working with so many people in their presentations. So I'll just kick off then. At Presentation Studio, what we believe in is the power to really connect through presentations. So that's what our goal is to help people to people connect through presentations. And the reason that I'm so passionate about that is that, as Lisa said, I grew up in the UK, and I had all these goals of going off and working for Disney and being part of the great sort of movie scene and being able to tell stories that way. But somehow that goal of me going off to work for Disney and creating all these amazing animations didn't quite work out. And I ended up in the centre of London creating PowerPoint presentations for a very large bank. And the difference in the dream and the reality was quite strong for me. But it was that experience of working for this bank. They were a Deutsche Bank, actually, a German bank, and we had these brand guidelines that were sort of A3, really large and super thick, and 6 photos that I was allowed to use for the entire year. And what that meant was that I got A, really good at understanding brand guidelines, and B, really I grew the way that I could be creative throughout their presentations. And it was while I was there that I saw the power of presentations. I knew that they were really a powerful force and they had such important messages. Yet most of these messages were truly hidden inside all of the noise and the words that people put on the screen. So I made it my goal to literally embrace the PowerPointness and sort of use my creativity in a way that could really help people. And when I arrived in Australia, I was literally creating avocado sandwiches in one hand for my young daughter and PowerPoint presentations in the other. And that was over 10 years ago. And we now have close to 30 people based in our Sydney offices at Fox Studios. So the thing that we have learned at Presentation Studio is that we can truly connect when we think of presentations like movies. So when we bring together the content and structure of what we're saying, and then we can combine that with the visuals that help your audience understand and communicate and remember what you're saying. And then the final component is delivery in terms of the way that you speak and you share that information. And when we bring all of that together, that's when we have the power to connect through our presentation and ultimately to influence the thinking of the people in your audience. A lot of the time, people get a bit stuck in their presentations, and they come to us so that we can either write their presentation, design their presentation, manage the whole process, or physically train people how to do that. So there is a real full service that we can provide. And it's the insights of working with some of the leading brands in Australia that help us to be best equipped to prepare and support other people with their presentations. A lot of people get confused around the definition of a presentation. A lot of people think that we kind of have to have this two-way conversation, but the actual definition is that a presentation is literally a one-sided form of communication. That the speaker is going to stand there and share that information, and then have our audience come into the room thinking a certain way to then lead. For us, the goal is for us to persuade them and influence the outcome. So that's what I'm going to talk about today in terms of how we can literally persuade and influence our audience to think in a different way. To understand a bit about visual communication, I'm going to take us back in time to where we didn't talk very much. So when we literally couldn't talk, we would share visual communication by the drawings. And this would be the way that history was shared as we evolved. And as we got a bit more evolved, we would write, although this was pretty much only for religious purpose and the very few people that could read and write. Then we evolved a bit more and we started to share through songs and ballads, and it was much more for the masses. So this is carried on to be what we know now as the modern day movies, and most people, or a lot of people, get their history in one way or another through these movies. But in business, we didn't quite take the same path. We literally got stuck from the visuals and went straight for the acetates and overhead projectors. This is where I came on board, and we were literally had points of information and draw on acetates, and this is where we started in business communicating. And it's kind of where everything got a bit unstuck, because someone had that great idea of putting that little dot next to those points, and what we witnessed was the birth of the bullet point. Now this guy gets a massive rap when it comes to presentations. Everyone's sort of saying death by bullet point, death by PowerPoint, and really we have to be fair in that it's not the software that's the problem. We can make terrible keynotes or Prezi documents. That's not the problem. The problem is the words that we put next to the screen and next to the bullet point. Now, I actually can't see that you're not looking at me right now, so this isn't quite the same for a webinar experience, obviously. But what I do want, but when I show this screen in a room full of people, I can literally see all of the heads turn and they're reading the information on the slide, and you really do lose that connection. So the point of a presentation is not to stand there and recite what's on the screen, and your audience can do that on their own. The point of a presentation is for that human connection, human to human. So the tools over the years have evolved and they've changed, but our ability within business to truly communicate has definitely not improved at all. So Lisa's going to ask us a little poll. I think she's going to put that up on the screen very soon, because I'd love to get a sense of what software you guys are using to create your presentations. Is the preferred tool of choice PowerPoint, Prezi, Keynote, or do you literally prefer nothing at all? So I'd love to, for everyone to take a moment and be able to fill that out too for us as we go along today. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the content stage of our presentation. So the content is literally the words that we are using to communicate our message. And within a presentation, a lot of us start off at this really bad place where we literally take all of the slides that we've done or that we think might be relevant, and we pull them into one document and we kind of update some numbers. In fact, 80% of presentations start off life this way, and it's a really bad way of communicating and getting the right message for our audience. We end up with slides that kind of look like this, where there is so much information on the screen that our audience literally can't digest and read that information. So what we need to do is consider that whole side of things broken and move forward. We hear a lot of the time that content is king. Well, I'm here to say that that's not entirely true. Content is actually the supreme ruler of the universe. People come to us saying that, oh, we need support for our team because their public speaking's not very strong or they get super nervous. The reason that those later things are a challenge is not because, it's not just because their voice skills are weak, it's because their content isn't clear and the underlying structure and message of their presentation hasn't followed some of the basic rules. So I'm going to take you through what we believe are some of those real basic rules. And the first one starts with, what is your objective? Now it sounds simple enough, but most speakers, when I've spoken to them after their presentation and I've asked them what exactly they were trying to achieve, they're not always clear. So a great presentation, or a way of measuring success, is to identify which one of these 4 things you're truly trying to achieve. Might be a little combination of both, but generally speaking, one of these needs to be your priority. Are you trying to educate people, share some results, sell something, or spread your ideas? Now, right now, today, my goal is to educate, because lots of people think they know how to create great presentations or great PowerPoints, but they often miss some really obvious things. So my role is to educate, and that's really what I am trying to achieve. The thing around being honest about what our measure of success with our presentation is, that we need to make sure that that matches the needs of our audience. Often, we don't analyze who is in the room and have any understanding of who they are and why they're there. And that's absolutely crucial, because they've come in there for a reason. They might have been told somehow, but they have an agenda. They have an objective of what they're trying to achieve. Are you supposed to be there to solve that problem for them? And are you going to do that by what you're saying? I connect with my audiences as much as I can through LinkedIn before I meet with them. And then I can spend the time to find out who they are, speak to them, understand their pain points before I come, so that I can address those for them. That's why they're there. And I'll get to what else the alternative is later. So we're clear on our objective, then we're clear who we're speaking to. Then we need to be clear around our message. So the message is, it can be called all sorts of things, but lots of people call it the big idea or your message or your point of view. But you need to have a single overall message that wraps your presentation up. And that's what people remember. A recent study showed that when a group of people were shown 20 slides, and then they were pressed on the recall rate afterwards, less than 10% was remembered. And the reason that those slides were remembered is because they visually looked different from the rest of the slide. So imagine if your message, that point of view that you have, and we're not talking about the title of your presentation, we're talking about your big idea of what your point of view is and how that's going to help change something. Imagine if that message was visually different from the rest of your slides and you spoke about it at least the beginning, middle, and end of your presentation. That's going to stand out and be remembered by your audience going forward. And that's a core thing of what we're trying to achieve within our presentation. We want our message to be remembered and we want people to act on it. In order for people to act on it, we've got to be clear what we want them to do. Often a presentation will close with question time, or it might have overrun, so they skip the most important part at the end and rush through those really crucial slides. We want to make sure that we close with a super strong call to action so your audience know what it is that you want them to go out and do. Can you send a follow-up document that has some clear links for them to do? Or if you're asking them to act on something, do they know what it is that you want and how easy are you making it for them to do? These are the crucial things that we need. And we want to try and avoid closing our presentation at question time, because a lot of people in the room are not interested about what some of those questions might be. And all too often I see question time and it's someone running their own agenda, trying to up themselves rather than the speaker in the room. So what I recommend is that you have your question time considerably earlier than the close of your presentation, and then bring back the close of your presentation. Finish on a high, finish with your clear call to action. It's only then that we can start thinking around the content of our presentation. So we're clear on our objective, our audience, and what our message is going to be. Then we can start thinking about the best way to put that information into a presentation. So it might not need anything at all. It might be that I'm just going to talk and share some ideas through stories and some key points and motivate my team that way. Or I might have to share some information that is going to really help my audience comprehend what I'm talking about. Most presentations, whether they're created in PowerPoint, Keynote, Google Docs, or Prezi, have far too much information in. Prezi isn't the solution in terms of sort of the way that the information is delivered, but what it is great at is it forces you to put less information in the first place. So that is one of its advantages. But ultimately, the software you use is irrelevant. We're completely agnostic. We don't support any one more than the other. But what the presentation software is great at is putting all of the diagrams and information and text onto the slide and creating what I've shown here as, whether you call it a slide doc or a handout, but it's that comprehensive report that can be read on its own, kind of like a magazine. If I was to PDF this and send it around to people, then they're going to understand everything that I've said, and we visualize some of the key insights, and it's a great read. This is not a presentation. A presentation is something that is visually sparse, and it supports what the speaker is saying in order for your audience to remember and act. When we have a clear definition between the two, we're giving people permission to start to think differently, and that we can have our report document, and we don't want to print this out and share it with our audience while we're speaking, because they're just going to flick to the end and find what they're interested in. What we want is to share that information after our presentation or as a pre-read, but certainly not during. And then we have that report as our supporting information. But the presentation is the human-to-human contact, where the speaker in the room can be speaking for a certain amount of time, preferably as short as possible time, share their key points of where we are right now and where we want to be going in the future, and why that's important for me, the speaker, as well as you, the audience, and how we're going to get there. Those are the things that need to be done in person to build up and inspire and excite your audience through the passion of human contact. A report looks like this, lots of information, and we can print that out. Presentation, asking the same thing, is something that creates an emotional feeling for your audience. There's not lots of information on there, so your audience is forced to listen to what you're talking about, but it's more memorable because of the visual. But in a corporate environment, I'm not at all suggesting that we just have 30 or 40 photos on a slide, because that's not going to be remembered and they're not going to stand out either. Lots of stock photography is certainly not going to be remembered. So if we have a typical kind of report style information slide, then the best way of sharing this information is to take all of that, save it as a PDF, send that out. But the presentation version, we can split it up. There should be no rule that says we have a limited slide count within our presentations. You need to rehearse and plan your presentation to a set amount of time and rehearse with those slides so that you're not rushing at the end. But certainly not squishing everything into less slides does not equal a better presentation. Worst case, you could potentially animate the slides in like I've just done here, but still you're going to have audience straining and struggling to read some of that information. The other thing is that human beings can read far faster than we can talk. So if you are literally reading off these slides as a teleprompt, your audience has already read it before you. So there's really little to no point of wasting the cost and time of people being in that room. So what I'd love to do now is to ask a second poll. And in this poll, I'd love to know what you think about the idea of giving people permission to use a report versus a presentation. Is that something that you think is going to be acceptable? So I'd love to see more people using a report and presentation. So is that something that you think can work in your environment? Often I think people just need a reason to follow, and then they can, when they kind of understand that they do need a certain amount of information to support what they're saying. So now we're going to move on to design and how we can visualize that information that we're sharing. And the way that we do that is by thinking with visuals. Humans are actually programmed to remember through visuals. And we can create those visuals by sharing stories, talking about a place and a location and a time. It helps us build that visual in our minds as to what we're talking about. And that helps people remember and inspires them to act. It's a really emotional way of sharing information. For example, if I was to show, this is a French poet, and Jacques Prévert, and he was walking down the street, and he saw a beggar on the side of the road, and the beggar had an empty pot, and he was asking for money. And our friend here, he didn't have any money either, because he was a poor poet. So he literally said, "No, I can't help you, but one thing I can do is maybe I could rewrite the sign." So the beggar, who was blind, literally gave him the cardboard, and our friend the poet flipped it over and wrote something on the back. A few days later he came back past, and he was pleased to see that the pot was filling up with money, and the beggar said, "Wow, what did you do?" And Jacques explained that he had written on the card, "Spring is coming, but I won't see it." Humans are programmed to visualize things and understand things, and when we hear stories like this, I guarantee we remember them far more because of the impact that it makes on us. Humans recognize visuals 60,000 times faster than they do words. If I was to ask you to visualize a beer right now, I know it's a little early, but you never know, then most people would visualize something that looks like this, maybe a green bottle, but most people would visualize a beer that looks like this. I haven't yet to meet anyone that visualizes a beer with the letters B-E-E-R. It simply doesn't happen. It's not how we're programmed. But when we use visuals that are completely fake, like most of these, no one is ever this happy or shiny white teeth eating tomatoes. We need to use visuals that are far more real and authentic, and that people can relate to. I was pleased to see that in 2000, well, I wasn't pleased to see in 2007, but in 2007, this was the most downloaded Getty visual. And I was very pleased to see that in 2017, the most downloaded female visual was something that shows a bit more kind of an aspiring visual for us to be using. We're seeing a lot more use of video within presentations. So not the kind of video that we sit down and say, okay, everyone, we're going to watch a video right now, but videos that can be used in the background to, in a subtle way, create that emotional connection. See, something as large and macro, as close up as this visual, it actually ignites the senses in your brain, which again will help you remember and be emotionally attached. We don't want a visual that is too distracting, but we want to create a way of remembering what it was that the speaker was talking about. The same with this slide. Using a visual that can create that physical sensation is also going to help your audience remember. We can also just use it for a subtle effect. So you can now add text over the top of video very easily in PowerPoint, and it just creates a bit more of a professional look and feel. Google is not your local image library, so I strongly recommend that we don't go into Google and download visuals, certainly not going into the image libraries and chopping off the little logos in the corner. There's a selection of websites here where the green ones are all completely free. Unsplash and Pexels are one of the newer ones on the market. They have a great range of really quite creative visuals that are completely free. Shutterstock and iStock are also relatively affordable. And Getty, fantastic visuals, but incredibly expensive, so definitely positioned at the premium market. So when we think about the visuals, we can use those, but we also need to create supportive information that helps explain what we're talking about. We want to avoid using 3D graphs because they can be very confusing. So as you can see here, you kind of think that the first bar here would be something around the sort of 19 mark, but it's not, it's too high. So 3D graphs, we want to avoid using those. Keep using flat, simple graphs where it's easy to understand, and really highlight the area that you really want to talk about and don't worry about the rest. A graph like this, where there is so much information on the slide, is just going to completely distract your audience. They'll be trying to look at what's relevant to them, or they might just have switched off because it's all too hard. What you want to do is to talk about the insight of what you're sharing and not all of the noise of the graph. This is the stuff that can go into the report and be used as a follow-up document to prove what you're saying. When you're standing in front of this, your audience will be distracted because of the noise. The speaker for that slide, actually, they just wanted to talk about the fact that there was 55% growth. This slide supports what the speaker is saying far more powerfully than the noise of the data graph. Or we could take the typical pie chart. We've got 15% of employees. Yeah, this shows 15% pretty clearly. But we can't. What if we had several pie charts? No one's going to remember that. How about we take 100 icons of people and we highlight 15 of those? That looks like a pretty good positive story to me. Or maybe we could take a visual and have the insight overlaid over the top of the visual that shows this team that we're talking about. Depending on what you're trying to say, there's obvious differently better ways of showing that information. So for example, this bar chart shows how much more South Australia is leading the change in terms of their renewable energy. But maybe we want to highlight that area and have the information more on a map, but depending on the insight of what you're saying. But this certainly doesn't show the contrast between the other states in terms of how high that number is. These three graphs all show the same information. But depending on what you're trying to say, the way they represent the information is quite confusing. For this speaker, they actually just wanted to say that 29% of their product was for the cat market. So how about we just visualize that insight in a way that makes it far more easy for your audience to understand what you're trying to say. Or perhaps the insight of what we're saying is something different. We could show the graph of showing all of the information, or perhaps we just want to, as a speaker, focus in on Japan. How about we show a visual that supports what we're saying, and we could visualize that market in that way. That is going to be remembered far more than a bar chart. It's around being able to visualize and create emotion as well as supporting the information. So what about this graph? Well, perhaps now we're not talking about any particular product. Maybe we just want to say, my gosh, there is so much competition. It's literally a flooded market and we don't know what to do. So now we're talking about the insight of that overall graph and not anything in particular. But my goodness, when I saw this slide, I was like, I would not want my kids in that water. This is definitely showing an overflowing abundance of people, and it's a pretty scary slide, but it will be remembered. So if the insight is to say that the competition is everywhere, this slide absolutely achieves it. But maybe the insight isn't to say that the competition are everywhere. Maybe it's saying that, well, the competition are everywhere, but how are we going to stand out? What is our advantage over our competitors to make them use us and not the others? There are different ways of visualizing depending on what you're trying to say, which is why, again, we come back to how important that content is from the beginning. And it's all about presenting the insight of what we're saying compared to the data. The data is important in the report, but it's not what we want to be sharing in the presentation. So what are some fundamentals of how we can share our information? So coming back to when I was at Deutsche Bank, we had very clear brand guidelines, and most companies do have these. But within presentations, we can have a few clear rules too. So it's around the use of colours, the typography that we use, the style of photographs that we use, and the types of illustrations. And then finally, a consistent layout of our presentations. So the colours, if I talk within PowerPoint, we kind of want up to 5 or 6 different colours within our presentations, and we can adjust those into the theme. When it comes to typography, we don't want to be using anything more than 2 different types of fonts, and really they should be quite contrasting. So it's a case of having either 2 very different looking fonts or fonts from the same family but quite contrasting. So I would suggest something either a heavy font and then a lighter font, or a heavier font and then a kind of more scripted font. But we want contrast so that our eye is drawn to that information in a way that it wouldn't be drawn if everything looked the same. That's the hierarchy of how we're laying out our pages of information. When it comes to the photography styles that we use, if we go to the image library banks, then we can find shots that have been created by the same artists or the same models. So they have the same look and feel, and by using visuals that have that same flow, then it's going to create a much more professional look and feel. If you can't find photos that kind of look like they've all got that same look and feel, a good trick is to add an overlay, maybe a color wash over the top of those slides so that they kind of all look the same. So they look like when people flick through the presentation, it has a professional look and feel, like it's all worked on together. Illustrations are a fantastic way of creating a way that humans can understand more easily, especially if you have different cultures and English second language speakers in your audience. They can definitely help simplify the information. And then working to a consistent layout so that your slides have a consistent look and feel is also really important. And when you bring them all together, you can see how well everything works. And I've got some more examples later that I'll be sharing as well. So the final piece in our puzzle is around the delivery. And to talk about delivery, I'm going to share the importance of connection through some examples of what we've done for some of our existing clients. This is an example for Toll, and Toll have really embraced the process of having a report document as well as a presentation document. So this is the report style document. Again, created 100% in PowerPoint, but you can see how much information there is on there as well as the text. And it's a great way of having that handout document. It doesn't have to look like a typical PowerPoint slide. It's just easier sometimes for people to make edits and update when all of that information is in PowerPoint. That same document has then been created into a PowerPoint presentation that is visually sparse, but helps support the speaker and communicate the information that they want to share. So it's less distracting. Your audience can't read all of those words on the slide anyway, but sometimes you do need to provide that information. So it makes absolute sense to have 2 documents to share that information. And then your audience and the speaker can clearly understand what it is that you're trying to say that way. This is another example that just shows how some nice simple movement within a presentation can really sort of keep your audience interested yet not confused. And there's not so much, I've run these a bit faster than I would typically, obviously, but by a little bit of movement they're able to talk through these points and that you can see very much the visual consistency of these slides in the way that the whole story comes together for the speaker. So simple text, simple visuals, subtle movement, but overall the slides really work together very well. And there's great consistency between all of the slides. Another example that we've got is This one that had an overall style that really made sense for the information that they were trying to share. So they had a theme of the ants, and it was fantastic in terms of being able to really continue a look and feel throughout the presentation, and it created that a real level of consistency. And so this is something that we see often, especially for large events and roadshows, where we can really create a theme for the presentation and then carry that through in all of the slides as well. So it gives that real sense of visual consistency for your audience, and it makes the whole experience a lot more fun for everyone. So these are great examples of how you can visualize that kind of information as well. But these slides do have a more text than I would advocate, but sometimes there is a need to have a little more text on the slides, depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve. So for example, these slides were created for George Weston Foods. Now, I'm sure you've seen slides that look like this on various occasions. So again, we were able to cut back some of the text, but using all of the elements that I spoke to you about before. So we've got high sort of resolution visuals that take up the full screen, simple animation to bring in some of those key points, a visual consistency to the look and feel of the presentation, some icons that help visualize the progress, and lots of white space so your eye is drawn to that information, and then some key points. So there's a real tone of like visual consistency. Oceano, now these guys didn't have any, they had some relatively negative news to share with their teams, but it was a way of visualizing that information in a way that could help them understand. So as they're a logistics firm, they had some incredible photographs that we were able to use, as well as then create infographics that help explain the message that they were sharing. But again, in PowerPoint, we can bring this information in, and some clean icons, simple colors, and subtle animation to sort of really help enhance. And once you start creating presentations like this within an organization, then people can see the power of change, and everyone starts to communicate more effectively. And it's a really powerful thing. Another example is for Commonwealth Bank. So everything I've said earlier is around we should use visuals and have less text. But this example clearly shows less text and more visuals. But obviously there's something quite lacking in terms of the professional finish. So what we were able to do was continue the, in this occasion, the roadshow theme, and use the very strong brand in a way that really helps represent them, and again, it's following the same rules of being able to bring that information in for your audience. I think that some of the key things to think about are what you're trying to achieve, and then what visuals enhance the message that you're sharing. So I think you'll agree that the bar now in terms of what PowerPoint can do, and Keynote and Prezi, is incredibly high. So it is really important that if you want to stand out amongst your competitors, that you also increase the level of your communication. And it's just from a personal perspective, when you're confident that the presentation that you're delivering supports what your message is, then your confidence goes through the roof. You're more confident to practice and rehearse, which means that overall your delivery will be far better, because we can invest that time in rehearsal rather than panicking about what we're going to be saying. This is an example for APN Outdoors. Now, these are the before slides, and in all honesty, they really don't look that bad, but they knew that they wanted to, again, create more of an impression with their slides. And so it was about following a consistent style for the event that they had. And again, simple icons that introduce the information, and that real consistency and subtle animation to create a real kind of dynamic effect within their presentation. It's incredibly powerful. Another example, this event was actually created for a conference at a National Art Gallery. And so we were lucky enough to create the whole series much more artistically than perhaps some of the other presentations that we work on. But again, all showing that consistent look and feel of what you're sharing. So that was also a fantastic way of sharing information. So I think that what I'm showing here is that we can go from from having strong brand and corporate presentations through to something incredibly creative, but we can achieve great results with both. So to summarize everything that I've been talking about, I've got some key points that I'd like you to remember and then act on as you go forward to your next presentation. So the first thing I spoke about was being clear on what your presentation objective is. If you want to measure success on this presentation, what are you trying to achieve? Have you been clear for your audience in what you want them to go out there and do next? And have you made it super easy for them to follow up and do that? What is your point of view, and how are you going to make sure that if less than 10% of your presentation is remembered, that is going to be the most, if less than 10% of your presentation is going to be remembered, how are they going to remember the most important bits of what you've said? When it comes to the content, how are you going to deliver this information? Do you need to share a presentation? Can you just share a report? Do you want to have that physical presence? And how is the best way of preparing information that will help them remember and act on what you've said? Using visuals within your presentation is incredibly powerful, and we can use visuals through storytelling as well as through pictures on our screen. Steve Jobs used to rehearse for up to 70 hours for some of his presentations. Now we're not all launching iPhones, but we do need to show our audience the respect of having rehearsed and being aware of what we're presenting. Don't let it be a quick check through in the taxi on the way through to your presentation. Passion is one of the most important things that comes through in a presentation. We can have the finesse of the gestures and the voice coaching, but ultimately people buy from people. So we want to have the passion come through. So be authentic, be real, share what it is that you love about what you're talking about. And this is probably the most important rule of all. Don't abuse your right to stand and present in front of your audience. Always be clear on how long you're talking for, and always finish within that time frame and never go over, and never rush and skip through slides in front of your audience, because it is a super bad look. So I've spoken today around the importance of thinking of a presentation kind of like a Hollywood movie. We need to think of our content and our structure and our message. Then we need to think of how we can visualize that message in a way that our audience will remember and understand. Then we can start thinking about the delivery in terms of communicating and connecting with our audience in a way that truly influences them and the outcome that you're driving. So I hope that some of the information that I've shared with you guys today has been really helpful, and that you can leave here today inspired to go and create some incredible presentations. I'm sure that Lisa and I can open up for questions now. And yeah, please let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Hi. So we have, great. So we've had a question that's come through asking where to get some great icons. And so one of the things that actually PowerPoint has just done is to now create an icon library for free within within PowerPoint. So that is certainly a fantastic tool that I would recommend. But also Shutterstock and iStock for very affordable prices. They have a range as well. Does anybody else have any other questions? Great, we've got another question that's come in here. So the question is, many presentations are now developed to be viewed by people individually and not presented by the speaker. How are the rules different? So I think one thing that we have is a great opportunity here to create different ways of sharing information. So within certain presentations now, we can add a voiceover, so we can then record, pretty much like I've done today, a webinar of sharing that information, but then also adding the voice, so that people at a later stage can watch that video. And then the same rules apply, and that we're trying to energize and share information as a person. But absolutely, that same supporting information needs to go in as a report and be shared separately. So that really would be my strong recommendation, is to have the separate report to the presentation. And keep that presentation nice and short and sweet, because ultimately, if we only have a couple of simple messages, then we don't need to take 60 minutes to share those. I hope that answers the question for that one. Great, and this is another great question that's come in. What's a good way to start talking to people about changing their approach to presentations? I think people are often scared about, scared about stepping away from what they consider the norm. This is my life's work. There are a lot of people that think that they're doing the right thing because it's been done that way for forever. So we can't expect people to go from one extreme to another overnight. It doesn't work. I've tried. I've literally had roadshows where people have been forced to go from, say, PowerPoint to Prezi, and suddenly their whole world has changed. They've got no speaker notes and the visuals are completely different. So we need to, if we're making change, we need to give them plenty of time to rehearse and be aware of what's changed. But most importantly, I believe in putting a lot of the information that you would otherwise put on the slide into speaker notes, and you could print that out so that you can rehearse and just have some of those bullet points underneath that help you. It's a big learning curve going from lots of people use slides as an auto cue, and they're not there for the speaker, they're there to help the audience. So we need to just start showing people good examples, showing them case studies, which is what I try and do, of where it works, and really being open to their nerves around the fact that it's not an auto cue for them anymore. But baby steps, really. I had another question around the movement in what I assume must be the presentation I've just shown. Everything I have shown you today is created in PowerPoint. So we've just used motion effects and animation of static photographs in the presentation. Apart from the eye and the rain, they were videos. Another question in terms of the colors that we should use. That's a great question. I think that obviously high contrast is much better in terms of our audience being able to understand. We don't want them straining. Light grey and the soft pastel colours, certainly a couple of years in a row, we had some beautiful soft toned pinks and blues of Pantone colours of the year, but they don't work well on screen. So we want the dark, bold colours that really help it be as easy as possible for our audience to understand. And it's the same with the thin fonts. So it might look fantastic on your 4K laptop screen, but a thin light grey font will not look the same on a big projector. Another question in terms of the length of the presentation. So I believe that a presentation should only be as long as it needs to be to make your point. And I think that a great opportunity is to speak for 15-20 minutes, really get your point of view across, be clear on what the actions are, and then spend that time talking through questions, or then spend that time talking through the report document and any concerns or areas that people want to talk about that. So kind of like an exec summary that we would have, give that up front, tell your audience you're going to be speaking for 15 minutes to get your point of view across in where you want to see the change, and then take the time to really get human and interact with your audience. Obviously, a lot of people take a lot longer than that, but I don't think that you would need any longer than that. Another question regarding the sources for stock videos. So the places that we use the most would be iStock and Shutterstock, and I'll happily share a link after this, which has got a couple of my white papers, and in those I've got some examples of where to go to find video and photos as well. So I hope that would help. And the format of those videos, it actually really depends on the computers that you're using, so and the software that you're putting those in. So Macs behave better with different format videos to PCs. So it really does depend on what you're trying to achieve. But I can share some more information around that as well. Great. Well, I'm just having a look through to see if there are any other questions. Don't want to miss anyone out. There's a question about the colours in terms of how they can make you feel. It's actually a great segue because I've just written a book. And in my book called Visual Thinking, I have a whole section that talks about the different colours and that can represent different feelings and moods. And they can actually be quite different across different cultures as well. So maybe I'll share a link to that as well. Oh, that's a great question that's come in. So I've just been asked, do you find that a corporate brand corporate's brand guidelines may impede your designing of a presentation? Now, this is a great question because one of the things I hate about corporate brand guidelines are that they'll have this whole creative space for digital and print, and then somewhere towards the back there'll be an adapted version of the logo with some colors and some bullet points on a PowerPoint page. And we're pretty much setting our teams up for failure when we try and force them to use these templates that have been designed in what's very now outdated style of using PowerPoint. So whilst I acknowledge and think that brand guidelines are incredibly important in terms of having a consistent look and feel across your brand, and we want to identify with that truly, but I do believe that we limit ourselves when we force people to use the bullet points and have logos and flash bands of color across half the page, because it doesn't help the delivery of the information. So I think we do need to push back, but of course check in with brands, because it definitely doesn't make sense if we've got, and we shouldn't advocate people thinking that they have much more creative freedom in PowerPoint and then just going off using totally different colors and 3D effects that are going to really let the company down. Okay. I think there was another question that came in around the template. And so it is important to use the organization's template, but generally within those templates there'll be something that is a lot cleaner than the rest of the slides, and so I do recommend using the cleanest slides, maybe something that's as blank as possible, and just really of putting as little information on those slides as possible and using that heavy template for the report version. Another thing that we can do is the marketing team will generally have created a range of icons and assets that they'll be using for print and digital. So what I would recommend is reaching out to those guys and asking for those files or a version of. They can adapt the kind of Illustrator files and artwork and make them available to people so that they can be used consistently. PowerPoint will easily let you adapt some of those Illustrator files that have been used by the marketing teams to put into your presentations. And that's probably the most cost-effective way of using and sharing the existing brand material and assets that you have. Wow, we've just got another question in that's asking, what's the minimum font size that you would use on a slide? We have a template that allows 10 points. Wow. There's nothing wrong with 10 or 11 points in a report, but I would try and make it larger, think more like probably about 14 to 16 if it's a report, because that's going to be read and people are going to be able to zoom in if they're struggling anyway on the PDF. But again, on the presentation slide, you don't want more than a couple of keywords, maximum a sentence. So of course, so that you would be looking at sort of 30 to 40 points. Just looking through any more questions.
Emma, there's one more that's come in through chat,
yeah.
and then I think we'll have to make that the last one so we can finish up. So.
Okay. Oh great, I've just seen it. So a question that's just come in is around how to be better in compiling presentations. So I'm going to share my white papers after this, and also a link to my book, because I'm very open in sharing the best rules for people to follow when creating their presentations, because really there are such important messages that just get lost and hidden inside all of these presentations that we create. So I'll be sharing that information with everyone that's signed up for this as well. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Emma. That was absolutely fantastic. I was madly scribbling down throughout that presentation. So many great lessons there. I will be sending out a copy of the recording to everyone who attended and those who were unable to attend, who did register for this webinar. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance. And I'll also make sure that we include Emma's links that she spoke about. We do host these webinars once every 2 months. So if you have any suggestions for topics or speakers, please do let us know through the IBC Asia Pacific board. Through our website, you can access our email addresses and contact us in that way. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Emma. You gave us all lots to learn today, and we really, really appreciate the time that you gave.
Brilliant. It's been my pleasure. Go out there and share the love. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.